White pine, Pinus flexulis. This species is widely distributed throughout the Rocky Mountains and overall the higher of the ranges of the Great Basin between the Wasatch Mountains and the Sierra, where it is known as white pine, and the Sierra is sparsely scattered along the eastern flank from Bloody Canyon southward to extremity of the range, opposite of the village of the Lone Pine. Nowhere forming any appreciable portion of the general forest from its peculiar position and loose straggling parties, it seems to have been derived from the basin ranges to the eastward, where it is in abundance. It is a larger tree than the dwarf pine at an elevation of about 9,000 feet above the sea. It often attains a height of 40 or 50 feet and a diameter of from 3 to 5 feet. The cones open freely when ripe and are about twice as large as those of the albiculus. And the foliage and branches are more open, having a tendency to sweep out in free, wild curves like most of the mountain pine, to which it is closely allied. It is seldom found lower than 9,000 feet above the sea level, but from this elevation it pushes upward over the roughest ledges to the extreme limits of tree growth, where, in its dwarfed and storm-crushed conditions, it is more like the white park species. Throughout Utah and Nevada, it is one of the principal timber trees, great quantities being cut each year for the mines. The famous White Pine mining district, White Pine City, and the White Pine Mountains have derived their name from it. Needle pine, Pinus aristata. This species is restricted in this area to the southern portion of the range about the headwaters of the Kings and Kern rivers, where it forms extensive forests and in some places accompanies the dwarf pines to the extreme limits of tree growth. It is first met at an elevation between 9,000 and 10,000 feet and runs up to 11,000 feet, without seeming to suffer greatly from the climate or the leanness of the soil. It is a much finer tree than the dwarf pine. Instead of growing in clumps and low, healthy mats, it manages in some ways to maintain an erect position, and usually stands signal wherever the finer trees, young trees, are at all sheltered. They grow up straight and arrowy with delicately tapered pole and ascending branches terminated with glossy bottle brush tassels. At every age, certain limbs are specialized and pushed out far from the bearing of the cones, and after the manner of the sugar pines, in an old age these branches droop and cast about in every direction, giving rise to very picturesque effects. The trunk becomes deep brown and rough like that of the mountain pine, while the young ones are of a strange dull blackish blue color, clustered on the upper branches. When ripe they are from 3 to 4 inches long, yellowish brown, resembling in every way those of the mountain pine. Excepting the sugar pine, no tree on the mountain is so capable of individual expression, while in the grace of form of movement it constantly reminds one of the hemlock spruce. The largest species I measured was a little over 5 feet in diameter and 90 feet in height, but this is more than twice that the ordinary size. This species is so common throughout the Rocky Mountains and most of the short ranges of the Great Basin, where it is called the foxtail pine, from its long, dense leaf tassels on the Hot Creek, White Pine, and Golden Gate ranges. It's quite abundant. About a foot and 18 inches of the end of the branches is densely packed with stuff standing needles which radiate like an electric fox or squirrel's tail. These needles have a glossy polish, and sunshine sifting through them makes them burn with silvery luster. While their number and elastic temper tell delightfully in the winds, this tree is here still more original and picturesque than in the Sierra, far surpassing not only its companion conifers in this respect, but also the most noted of the lowland oaks. Some stand firmly erect, feathered with radiant tassels down to the ground, forming slender tapering towers of shining verdure. Others, with two or three specialized branches pushed out at right angles to the trunk and densely clad with tasseled sprays, take the form of beautifully ornamental crosses. Again, in the same woods, you find three trees that are made of several boles united near the ground, spreading at the sides in a plane parallel to the axis of the mountain, with the elegant tassels hung in charming order between them, making a harp held against the main wind lines where they are most effective in playing up the grand storm harmonics. And besides these, there are many variable arching forms alone or in groups, with innumerable tassels drooping beneath the arches or radiant but above them, and many lowly giants of no particular form that have braved the storms of 1,000 years, but whether old or young, sheltered or exposed to wild gales. The tree is ever found in irreparably and extravagantly picturesque, and offers a richer and more varied forms of to the artist than any other conifer I know of. Nut pine, Pinus monophylia. The nut pine covers, or rather dots, the eastern flank of the Sierra, to which it is mostly restricted in grayish brush-like patches, from the margin of the sage palms to an elevation of from 7,000 to 8,000 feet. A more contentedly fruitful and unaspiring conifer would not be conceived. All the species that we have been sketching make departures from more or less distant from the typical spire form, but none go so far as this without any apparent exigency of climate or soil. It remains near the ground, throwing out crooked, divergent branches or like an orchard apple tree, and seldom pushes a single shoot higher than 15 or 20 feet above the ground. The average thickness of this trunk is perhaps about 10 or 12 inches. The leaves are mostly undivided, like round owls, instead of being separated like those of any other pines into 2 or 3s and 5s. The cones are green while growing and are especially found all over the tree, forming a quite marked feature as seen against the bluish-gray foliage. They are quite small, only about 2 inches in length, and give no promise of edible nuts. But when we come to open them, we found that the entire bulk of the cone is made up of sweet and nutritious seeds, the kernels of which are nearly as large as those of hazelnuts. This is undoubtedly the most important food tree on the Sierra, and furnishes the Mono, Carson, Walker River Indians with more and better nuts than all the other species taken together. It is the Indians' own tree, and many a white man have they killed for cutting it down. And its development, nature seems to have aimed at the formation of a fruit-bearing tree surface as possible. Being so low and accessible, the cones are readily beaten off with poles, and the nuts procured by roasting them until the scales open is bountiful. Seasons, a single Indian will gather 30 or 40 bushels of them, a fine squirrelish appointment. Of all the conifers along the eastern base of the Sierra, and all the many mountain groups and short ranges of the Great Basin, this fruitful little pine is the commonest tree with the most importance. Nearly every mountain is planted with it, to heights from 8,000 to 9,000 feet above the sea. Some are covered from base to summit by this one species, with only a sparse growth of juniper on the lower slopes to break the continuity of its curious woods, which, though dark looking at a distance, are almost shadeless and have none of the damp, leafy glens and hollows so characteristic of the other pines. Tens of thousands of acres occur in continuous belts indeed. Viewed comprehensively, the entire basin seems to be pretty evenly divided into level plains dotted with sagebrushes and mountain chains covered with nut pines. No slope is too rough, none too dry for these bountiful orchards of the red man. The value in the species to Nevada is not easily underestimated.